Senior Republican spokesman Morkoc joins me now from Detroit to discuss the immigration policy that's on the front burner. Good to have you and happy weekend to you. Now, prioritizing politics over people is what critics are basically talking about now. Now, isn't the Trump administration's failure to address the root cause of migration, like poverty and violence in Central America, isn't that like the priority right now? Shouldn't that be the issue on the front burner?
Oh, absolutely not. The priority right now is the American people and the American cities and the American culture that has been totally devastated by unchecked migration from those places. 6% of the country of Nicaragua came to America during the Biden administration. The Trump administration was elected to conduct these enforcement procedures. Keep in mind, we are enforcing the law of the country. If you've come here illegally, we are trying to get you out of here. And so it is, of course, respecting the humanity of the American people who have been under this onslaught. In addition, we have a situation where these are not exactly the most honest ways of framing it that they have put forth, because what they're doing is trying to have a backdoor access to economic migration. That's not asylum. So creating work permits for these people and bringing people in on asylum, well, that's suppressing the labor quotient for the most vulnerable Americans. And as more and more Americans find themselves out of work in this new economy driven by AI, in California, you see it every day in the tech sector, high-end jobs being eliminated, low-end jobs being limited. The last thing we need is more competition for those jobs, especially by people who legally do not have the right to work in America. So what we want is increased legal immigration, increased skilled immigration. We want to completely eliminate and remove anybody who has abrogated U.S. federal immigration law.
So, Errol, doesn't separating families and detaining asylum seekers undermine America's founding principles of compassion and freedom? Plus, do you think, I know you're with the Republicans, do you think there are better ways also to handle this so it doesn't spark the much, debate and protests and all of that in the United States?
We're okay with protests, and we welcome anybody to make their voice heard. When you commit a crime in America, as an American, you get removed from your children. So if I go and I rob the bank, I get taken to jail, and I'm sorry, but unfortunately, my children suffer from that. So when you say separating your families, what we're doing is saying, you've come here, you've created a situation. Now you should take your children and go back to your home country with them. You want to leave your children here and then say we're separating the families? Take your children with you. What kind of parents are these? So we're not separating families. And keep in mind, Donald Trump has deported less people still than Barack Obama, still than George Bush. He's not as successful at it because, of course, we have this resistance from sort of political actors in places like Minneapolis or in Chicago, where their cities are collapsing, but they're getting their votes this way. And so ultimately, Donald Trump's main focus is the American people and those American families. Think of the families of Lincoln Riley and other people who've been murdered by illegal immigrants who've come to America. Those are the families that Donald Trump's here to protect, and those are the families that he promised to, and that's what the American voter put him there to do. And so he's delivering on his promises, and we believe these are American values, enforcing the law and making sure that the American people are not being offensively put through interesting versions of immigration pain is one of the things that he has to do as the commander-in-chief and executive branch of this country, which is to give leadership. And honestly, it's leadership for the American people, not for people who've broken our laws.
So here's the thing about it, Morkoc. When I reference the families, you're talking about some families who are already detained. When you detain such families, that's separation from their families. When the immigration detains, what's the next move? What's the plan? Is it to release them or to deport them? That's where to deport. So how long does a particular family have to stay in detention for them to get deported? That's the separation we're talking about.
Yeah, well, we have family detention centers actually that we created during the Obama administration, and those facilities do exist. And one of the great things that DHS is able to do with this much larger budget that I think we're going to build into this conversation is the expansion of the federal intake facilities, the tens of thousands of beds required for this monumental operation, as there's been so many illegal immigrants coming to the United States. So, detaining people, obviously, you have to keep in mind once they have exhausted their legal recourse for asylum. You come into America, you have a real asylum claim, okay. But if you come and you say, well, it looks like you're an economic migrant or this and that, once we get to the point of deportation, it goes quickly. And I think that's why we've put a moratorium on all of these new intakes, because we have such a backlog right now that we have to clear out the existing situation so we can deal with these people humanely. It's very unfair to somebody. As you're pointing out, they're waiting in detention center. Am I free to go? Am I not free to go? Well, we need to have judges. We need to have space. We need to be able to do this. And we can't have 10,000 people coming in the back door every week as we're trying to process these people. So I think all of it is pointing to the giant sort of octopus that had been operating in the U.S. immigration system and operating to the detriment of the American people who eventually voted for Donald Trump to change it.
Now, isn't the administration's focus on broader war funding and harsh, enforcement a distraction from real national security threats like, cyber attacks and pandemics? That's some of the issues being raised by critics.
I don't think so, because America is such a talented, broad country with so many different departments. We have CDC for certain things. We have Department of Homeland Security, of course, is going to be hyper focused on Homeland Security. And Homeland Security does involve cyber threats and does involve all those things. But one thing that it wasn't doing was on the ground enforcement. It was a catch and release system. And that system, where you had automatic work permits, catch and release, was ripe for fraud. And so in the end, the situation is we have decided to eliminate that fraud by hiring the people required to enforce the laws already on the books. Trump hasn't made new laws. Congress is basically a dysfunctional body. They barely pass anything. One thing they haven't done is pass any special laws for Trump. Trump is just getting the personnel to enforce the existing laws, and the same laws that Barack Obama, the deporter-in-chief, implemented without any pushback. So it's very interesting. The pushback all comes on President Trump. But Barack Obama deported many more people than President Trump, and there's silence from the so-called critics.
So now let's talk about Trump. I mean, let's go in on this, but I would want for you to, if you can just stick to a few sentences, because I've got a whole lot of questions for you. Won't Trump's immigration restrictions lead to labor shortages and economic damage in industries like agriculture and hospitality? That's, that hospitality is one tops when it comes to the economy. It also affects the economy, and you have a lot of citizens who are there. I understand the parts where you talk about illegal, migration, but then these agriculture, hospitality, these people are said to be handling most of these areas in the United States.
So when it comes to agricultural and illegal immigration, only about 1% to 2% of illegal migrants in total work in certain sectors in California, which is the largest area. The majority of illegal labor is not on farms picking fruit and whatnot. In that situation, what we need to do is a robust work permit visa program. There's no reason why we can't have a modern visa program where people can come back and forth without a pathway to citizenship. So that's important to have there, because having workers' rights and respecting the rights of the American worker who is being squeezed out and being put on welfare. And that's one of the situations that you have with illegal migration. So we want to make sure we protect American labor, but we also want to make sure that in these special sectors, we reform the policies. So there is guest worker visa programs, but not illegal programs. And that's the difference.
Now, you talk about programs there. That brings to cause this particular question, but then I'm going to just merge it in two. You talk about programs. Do you have those programs in place? And are asylum seekers who follow U.S. law and, present themselves at port of entry really gaming the system, or are they seeking safety and opportunity?
So we have certain programs and they're not very good. We have J1 visas, we have O1 visas, we have like seasonal visas. The entire system isn't really ideal. And I think right now, when you have so many people in the country and you have so much of an oversupply of potential labor, that's why they've put the backstop on it, because they need to figure out what to do with who is here right now. Because right now we have way too many illegal people that are a drain on the social systems. And those social systems are what are being most impacted for lower income Americans. So we have to balance all of these situations, because the humanity of the American citizens is also critical to keep in mind while we try to find a new system. But right now we don't have a functional immigration system. It's completely broken. And that is why President Trump is putting a hard moratorium on these new asylum seekers. Because again, you can't seek asylum for economic benefits. That isn't asylum. That's just economic migration. And that's not the same thing. There's a backlog of people in every country around the world waiting to come here legally, and finding a backdoor and claiming asylum, it's not going to work anymore.
So let's talk about ICE for a bit, right? I remember we had a conversation about this ICE thing, and then Alex Pretty, from the information we got while we had that conversation, is totally different from the outcome because the two officers in question detained, investigations ongoing because obviously Pretty did not have any, weapon on him, and he's late. But so this leads me to the question of how Americans can trust ICE to enforce immigration laws fairly when there are credible allegations of abuse and misconduct.
Well, when you have a large, federal law enforcement apparatus, there's not going to be 100% success rate. There will be problems, and those problems come from systemic failures for 10 or 20 years. When you end up having tens of millions of illegal people in here, there's going to be tragic situations like with Alex or with the young woman in Minneapolis, things that nobody's happy to see. But also, if you are impeding federal investigations, if you are fighting with federal employees, circumstances will come around where you might find yourself on the wrong side of too much force, and there's a personal responsibility element. These heroes in ICE are going out there every day trying to make this country better and remove people who are either here illegally or who have committed very heinous acts, which is another thing that we see with ICE removing people who are child molesters, and people are trying to stop them from doing it. So there are two sides to the coin, but when the situation has been allowed to get this bad deliberately by open borders, it's very tough to turn around and tell the people who are trying to reinforce the situation that every time there's a mistake, the whole thing should just be go back to how it was, and we'll just continue going down the complete disaster that the last 4 years administration was.
Finally, just in very few sentences, if you can, won't Trump's immigration policies, ruin or deter relations with allies and partners, undermining global cooperation on security, trade, and climate change? And does Trump even believe in climate change? And is the Trump administration's America First approach to immigration, short-sighted, ignoring the historical benefits of immigration to U.S. innovation, culture, and economic growth?
Well, I think it's just a new world order has emerged. The need for large-scale economic migration to work in factories and stuff, as was in the first and second industrial revolution, no longer matters. The United States' entire advantage is brain draining the very top 0.1% of people out of all these countries. And they will continue to do so because in the end, if you look at Canada, it ranks below Alabama in GDP. Alabama is a more successful country on a standalone than Canada. Canada is the second largest country in the world. So the United States has no problem with resources, no problem making deals, no problem with its security alliances. What it has a problem with is domestic enforcement of its own laws, and we have the right as a sovereign country to do that. And we're sure that this will only help us attract more talented people to the United States. When I can tell an engineer, you can come to San Francisco and not be in fear of your life. You can come to Detroit and not be in fear of your life. Then all of a sudden it makes us a better, more attractive talent for those global citizens who bring that real next generation changing talent. No longer do we need people to come and work in factories. We need people to come and innovate at the very highest level because jobs are going down and the economy is changing. The fifth industrial revolution is upon us, and we need to prepare for it adequately.
Fingers crossed. Thank you so much, Morkoc, for joining us. He's a senior Republican spokesperson.